The windshield wipers slapped a violent, uneven rhythm against the glass, trying to clear the heavy, wet snow that was burying the interstate. It was a complete whiteout on I-90. My knuckles were pale and rigid on the steering wheel of my '99 Ford F-150. But I was 71 years old, fighting a Chicago blizzard to see my son. Beside me on the cracked leather passenger seat sat a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. I reached out and steadied it as the truck fishtailed over a patch of black ice. Inside that box was my grandfather's antique pocket watch. It had survived the Depression. It had survived 2 world wars. I only hoped it would survive this miserable trip to Naperville. I wanted to see my 10-year-old grandson Timmy's eyes light up when he opened it. I pulled off the highway, navigating the winding, pristine streets of the exclusive subdivision. The houses here were massive fortresses of brick and glass, designed to broadcast to the world that the people inside had made it. Finally, I pulled into the driveway of number 42 Oak Lane. Vehicles lined the heated paver driveway, a silver Mercedes, a brand new Porsche, a Range Rover. The silence was sudden and heavy. The wind hit me like a physical blow, but I didn't care about the snow soaking through my boots. I wanted to see my family. I walked up the long path to the front door, the muffled sounds of smooth jazz and high-pitched laughter spilling out into the night. These were people who had never had to worry about a heating bill. I rang the bell. I waited. I stomped the snow off my boots. The oak door swung open and Brandon stood there. My son looked like he had stepped straight out of a GQ magazine. He was wearing a bespoke black tuxedo with a velvet collar, his hair gelled. He held a crystal tumbler of scotch in one hand. He blinked at me, staring as if he didn't even recognize the man who had raised him. His polite party smile vanished instantly. He didn't step back to let me in. Instead, he stepped forward, aggressively filling the doorframe with his body. "Dad, what are you doing here?" It wasn't a question, it was an accusation. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. I forced a warm smile. "Merry Christmas, Brandon." I drove down to give Timmy his present. "I thought I'd surprise you all." Brandon looked nervously over his shoulder into the foyer. He pushed the door until it was almost closed, leaving only a sliver of warm light spilling onto the porch. He lowered his voice to a venomous hiss. "We are hosting a party, Dad. Vanessa's boss is here. The investors for the new tech startup are here. Look at you." He gestured dismissively with his scotch glass, pointing at my coat stained with old grease, my faded flannel shirt, my wet work boots. "You look like a mechanic. You look like a homeless person. You cannot come in looking like that. You are ruining the aesthetic. We are trying to close a deal tonight." My chest tightened. The wind bit fiercely at my face, but his words were far colder. "I drove 4 hours in a blizzard, Brandon. I want to see the boy. I want to give him his great-grandfather's watch." "No," Brandon cut me off, taking a casual sip of his scotch. "Not tonight. We are building an image here, Dad. We are high-net-worth individuals now. We cannot have you sitting on the white Italian leather sofas, smelling like diesel fuel and Old Spice. It is embarrassing. You need to leave." "Leave," the word hung suspended in the freezing air. "Go to the Motel 6 off the highway. It's cheap. I'll call you next week when things settle down. Maybe we can get lunch, but you have to go, now." Then she appeared, Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. She glided up behind Brandon like a shark in silk, holding a delicate flute of champagne. Her backless silver designer dress probably cost more than my entire truck. She didn't look at my face. She looked directly at my wet boots dripping onto her welcome mat. "Brandon, why is the door open?" "It is freezing in here. You're letting all the heat out." She saw me then, and her eyes narrowed. "Oh, it's Edward." Her lip curled in genuine, unhidden disgust. She turned to Brandon. "Honey, tell him to move his truck immediately. I can see it from the front window. It is dripping oil on the new pavers. We paid $10,000 for that driveway, and it looks like a junkyard out there." She looked back at me, as if I were the hired help who had stumbled to the wrong entrance. "Please, Edward, we have important people here. Go." I looked at my son. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to remember the nights I sat up with him when he was sick, or the double shifts I worked in the bitter to buy him his first car. "You heard her, Dad. You're dripping oil. Go to the motel. I'll text you the address." He started to close the door. I looked at the warm, golden light reflecting off his tuxedo, the diamond earrings swinging from Vanessa's ears. I didn't feel sad. I didn't feel the heartbreak a father normally should. I felt a sudden clarity. It was as if the snow had stopped and the world was rendered in sharp, high definition. "Okay," I said. My voice was eerily steady, it didn't shake. I adjusted the box under my arm, feeling the weight of the antique watch against my ribs. I would not let them have it. Not today. Not ever. "Merry Christmas, Brandon." I turned my back on the warmth and walked back into the howling wind. The snow hit my face like needles, but I didn't flinch. I climbed into the icy cab of my truck and slammed the door. The old engine roared to life with a rough cough. I looked at the magnificent house one last time. It was a beautiful house. It should be. I paid for it. That was the monthly mortgage transfer set to leave my account on the first of every month. An automatic payment I had set up 5 years ago. Past midnight. Merry Christmas indeed. A small smile touched my lips. I didn't put the truck in gear for the motel. I turned the wheel toward the city. I had a long drive ahead of me and a bank website to visit. He was about to find out exactly who the high net worth individual in this family was. The Motel 6 was 5 miles down the interstate, buzzing with flickering neon lights. Brandon expected me to sleep there on a lumpy mattress smelling of stale smoke while he toasted to his success with champagne I paid for. I drove right past the exit ramp, pushing the old Ford to 70 miles per hour. I was not going to a motel. I was going to my office. The Chicago skyline rose out of the storm like a fortress of steel and light. I navigated the empty streets of the financial district, pulling up to the rear entrance of the Millennium Tower, the tallest residential building in the city. A steel gate blocked the private ramp. I rolled down the window, pressing my thumb against the biometric scanner. It beeped once, and the gate slid open silently. I parked my rusted pickup dripping with melted snow in the spot marked PH1, right next to my own dusty Rolls-Royce Phantom that I hadn't driven in 6 months. I took the private service elevator, which required a key card and a retinal scan. My ears popped as the car shot upward to the 44th floor, opening directly into the penthouse foyer. The air here was filtered, expensive, smelling of cedar and silence. I dropped my grease-stained coat on the floor. I didn't care. I owned the floor. I owned the building. I walked into the 5,000-square-foot main living area, past the grand piano and the original Basquiat hanging on the wall, heading straight for my office. This was the nerve center of my life. I sat in the ergonomic leather chair and tapped the keyboard. The room was instantly bathed in the cool blue glow of 6 high-definition monitors. Bloomberg terminals flickered to life, scrolling rows of stocks, bonds, and real estate futures. Brandon thought I fixed engines in a garage. He had no idea I managed a private equity fund worth 9 figures. I poured 2 fingers of Macallan 50 into a crystal glass, taking a smooth, ancient sip. I placed my hands on the keyboard. It was time to cancel Christmas. I logged into the Sovereign Private Client portal, navigating past biometric checks and secure tokens to the financial circulatory system of my family. I had built it as a safety net. I realized now it had become a hammock. I clicked the Recurring Transfers tab. Brandon, mortgage assistance, $4,800 scheduled for the 1st. Those digits represented the freezing winters I spent on construction sites, while Brandon was at tennis camp. I thought I was giving him a foundation, but I had dug him a grave of dependency. I hovered over the cancel button. I didn't feel anger. Anger is hot and messy. This was cold. Surgical engineering. When a structural beam is rotten, you don't paint over it. You remove it before it brings down the whole roof. I clicked yes. The screen blinked status, canceled. The first pillar of his life collapsed. Next, I opened the credit cards tab, the Centurion Black Card ending in 8842. I had given it to him 5 years ago for medical crises or unexpected disasters. I checked the recent transactions. It was a manifesto of excess. The Liquor Barn, $3. 200 Sakes, 5th Avenue, $5. Ritz-Carlton Spa, $800. He was bleeding me dry to buy the costume of a successful man, demanding the lifestyle of a CEO without the 60-hour work weeks. I selected deactivate user reason, parental discretion. The status light turned red, suspended. The next time Brandon tried to impress an investor with that piece of titanium, it would be nothing more than a paperweight. Finally, the Timothy Caldwell Education Trust. I had fully funded it for my grandson's private school tuition, giving Brandon trustee access. But looking at the withdrawal history made my stomach turn. Round numbers, $10, $15, transferred to an LLC called Apex Ventures. A quick search showed Apex Ventures was registered to Brandon Caldwell. He wasn't paying tuition. He was stealing from his own son's future. I initiated a change of trustee protocol, removing Brandon and Vanessa's names, locking the trust completely. No withdrawals without my direct biometric authorization. I flagged the previous transactions for audit. In 15 minutes, I had dismantled the entire financial infrastructure of my son's life. I closed the browser, finished my whiskey, and went to bed. Tomorrow was going to be a busy day. I had 30 missed calls in my future, and I intended to enjoy every single one of them. The warmth inside number 42 Oak Lane was a contrast to the night outside. Brandon moved through the room, his hand resting lightly on the shoulders of potential investors, his laugh calibrated to sound approachable. He was the star. Vanessa was by the grand piano, charming her boss. A waiter approached Brandon with a silver tray. "Sir, the bill for the additional case of Dom Perignon you requested." Brandon smiled, waving a hand dismissively at a venture capitalist named Sterling. "Put it on the card on file," Brandon said, pulling the black titanium card from his tuxedo pocket with a flourish. "Of course, sir. But the terminal requires a quick authorization," the waiter said. He inserted the card, the machine whirred, a moment of silence stretched out, followed by a sharp, flat beep. The waiter frowned, wiping the chip and trying again. Another beep, a red light flashed. "I'm sorry, sir," the waiter whispered discreetly. "It says do not honor. The card has been declined." Brandon's smile froze, panic sparking in his eyes. "That's impossible. That card has no limit. It's a Centurion. Try it again. The system is locking me out." "Sir, do you have another form of payment?" Sterling was watching, his eyebrows raised. "Is there a problem, darling?" "A glitch," Brandon hissed, his face flushing a deep, ugly red. He fumbled for his wallet, handing over his personal platinum card with shaking fingers. The waiter ran it. Beep, red light, insufficient funds, sir. The silence in the room was absolute. Brandon stood holding two useless pieces of plastic, while the eyes of the people he most wanted to impress bore into him. The facade of the entrepreneur cracked, revealing the dependent boy underneath. Miles away, my phone vibrated on the obsidian desk. Transaction declined. 3 Rs 200s. Reason: card suspended by primary account holder. I felt the satisfaction of a mechanic hearing an engine stop making a terrible noise because he had cut the fuel line. The first domino had fallen. December 26th dawned and gray over Chicago. I sat alone at the head of my long dining table, drinking a steaming mug of black Blue Mountain coffee. My phone lay face up on the polished mahogany. I had silenced the ringer, but the screen constantly flared with a spectral white glow. For 5 years, they had only called when they needed money. Now, they were banging on the buttons of the ATM because the cash had stopped coming out. I imagined the whispers in their kitchen, surrounded by the debris of their party, and the crushing realization that their safety net had vanished overnight. I had kept the greenhouse so warm he never grew roots. Now I had shattered the glass. I picked up the phone, 30 missed calls. I swiped the screen and pressed play on the voicemails, wanting to hear the exact frequency of their fear. "Dad, hey, it's Brandon." The first message played, time-stamped at 12:30 a.m. "Listen, there was a weird hiccup with the card tonight. I'm sure it's a fraud alert. Love you." A casual lie offering me a chance to pretend it was a mistake. Message 5 at 2 a.m. "Dad, pick up the phone. Vanessa is freaking out. We had to put the bill on her personal card. I need you to authorize the transfer for the mortgage. Don't make this difficult." Message 12 at 7 a.m. "Are you ignoring me? You're not at the Motel 6. Where the hell are you? You promised to help us. Help is a hand up, not a handout." Message 20 was a pocket dial. The audio was muffled, but Vanessa's shriek was distinct. "You said the old man was a golden goose. You said he would never cut us off. The card is dead, the transfer is canceled, and I have a deposit due for Aspen. Fix this, Brandon, or I'm taking Timmy to my mother's." There it was, the unvarnished truth. They weren't worried about putting food on the table. They were fighting over stylists and ski trips. Vanessa didn't love my son. She loved his lifestyle. And Brandon viewed me as a utility bill. The final message, time-stamped 10 minutes ago, was imprecise. "Okay, Dad, you want to play games?" I called the police. I told them you're missing, confused, and acting erratic. When they find you, I am petitioning for emergency guardianship. We are going to get power of attorney and take control of the accounts for your own good. The cops are looking for your truck right now. My heartbeat slowed to a steady rhythm. He had crossed the line from ungrateful son to enemy combatant. He was using the legal system to strip me of my rights so he could keep buying champagne. He had fired the first shot. I didn't call Brandon. I dialed Arthur Patterson, my cutthroat lawyer. Edward, it's the day after Christmas. Is everything all right? Patterson asked. No, Arthur, but it is about to be. I am terminating his lease. Prepare the eviction papers and call the sheriff for a civil standby. Patterson paused. Edward, that lease was a formality. It's the nuclear option. He will drag your name through the mud. He's already dragging my name through the mud. He left a voicemail threatening to file for emergency guardianship and claim I'm senile. Patterson's tone hardened instantly. The shark woke up. Okay, if he files for guardianship, he freezes your assets. We strike first. I will have a notice to quit served at dawn. I'll prepare a competency affidavit in case. Get the house back, Arthur. It's time to clean house. At exactly 9 a.m., my intercom buzzed. Detective Griffin stepped out of the elevator. He wore a charcoal suit and carried a leather briefcase, looking like an investment banker who had seen too many crime scenes. He sat opposite me and popped the latches. I found everything, Edward, Griffin said grimly. And then I found more. You asked me to follow the money. It's criminal. If you take this to the police, you will be sending them away for a long time. I didn't feel fear. A builder knows that if a foundation is rotten, gravity doesn't care about sentiment. I paid for their life, Griffin. I have a right to know what I bought. He slid a thick folder across the obsidian desk. You bought lies, lies. I flipped the cover open. The first photograph was crystal clear. It showed Vanessa outside the Peninsula Hotel, wearing a coat I had bought her. A fit, 24-year-old man had his hand intimately on the small of her back. They were laughing warmly. She calls him her personal trainer, Griffin said. Tuesdays and Thursdays. Look at the cross-reference on the Centurion card. I traced the line items. Elite fitness consulting, $2,000 a month. Wellness retreats, $500 a session. The merchant code wasn't a spa. It was hotel room service. I had been paying her lover's salary. I had paid for the room where she betrayed my son. She had even bought him a Rolex Submariner with my money. Griffin opened the second section. Brandon's life. Apex Ventures isn't a tech startup. Edward, it's a shell entity. He funnels money into offshore crypto futures and high-stakes gambling. He loses 10,000, so he bets 20. He's an addict. The 200,000 you gave him for seed funding? Gone in a week. I stared at the staggering columns of red ink. Brandon wasn't a CEO. He was running a Ponzi scheme, and I was the primary investor. He had drained his own son's tuition fund to cover his debts. He owes a bookie in Cicero 50 grand, and the banks another 100. He is drowning, Edward, Griffin said quietly, and he was using you as a life raft. I closed the folder, the weight of the truth settling in my chest. I looked up at Griffin, my mind operating with absolute 0-degree clarity. Send the financial records to the IRS and the FBI and have Patterson accelerate the eviction. I want them on the street by tomorrow. I looked at the thick file on my obsidian desk. I didn't want to see anymore. I felt dirty, complicit in this disaster. I had created this monster. I had fed it with cash and sheltered it from consequences. I thought I was being a good father. I thought I was helping him build a life. Instead, I had financed a casino and a brothel. My son was a liar, a thief, and a gambling addict. His wife was an adulterer who used my money to keep a boy toy. And they had the unmitigated audacity to tell me I wasn't good enough to walk through their front door. They had judged my worn work boots while they stood in a house built on my hard-earned money and their disgusting fraud. I looked up at Griffin, my face feeling like it was carved from solid, unforgiving stone. Is that all? Griffin hesitated. He looked down at the Manila folder. He had not closed it yet. His hand rested carefully on the final tab. The tab was labeled Timothy. No, Edward, that is not all. The worst part is what they did to the boy. I felt a sudden, sharp, suffocating pain in my chest. Not Timmy. Anyone but Timmy. Show me, I commanded, my voice barely above a whisper. Griffin flipped the tab marked Timothy. The thick paper made a dry, rasping sound that seemed to echo menacingly in the silent penthouse. I expected to see trust fund statements. I expected to see more financial bleeding. I was prepared to see that Brandon had raided his son's future to pay for his own pathetic present. I was not prepared for what I actually saw. The first document wasn't a bank statement. It was a report card. I stared at the header. It didn't say the Latin School of Chicago. It didn't have the prestigious crest of the elite private institution I had been writing checks to for 5 long years. It said Lincoln Elementary, District Public School. I felt the room tilt slightly. I reached out and gripped the edge of the obsidian desk to steady myself. The Latin school cost $35,000 a year. I sent the check directly to Brandon every August. I sent additional checks for his uniforms, for his books, for the rowing club, for the debate team. Brandon had sent me glowing newsletters. He had told me heartwarming stories about Timmy's Latin teacher. He had told me about the fantastic field trip to the Art Institute. It was all a lie, a fabrication so complete, so intricate, and so cruel that it took my breath away. Griffin spoke, his voice lower now. He sounded like a man apologizing for a death in the family. He never enrolled him, Edward. He took the tuition checks and deposited them straight into the Apex Ventures account. Then he wired the money to a casino in Antigua. Timmy goes to the local public school. It is massively underfunded. It is overcrowded. And according to these attendance records, he misses about 2 days a week because no one even bothers to wake up to take him. I looked at the grades, D in math, D in English, incomplete in science. My grandson was a brilliant boy. I knew this. I had seen him take apart an old clock when he was 6 years old to see how the gears worked. I had seen the boundless curiosity in his bright eyes. And they had thrown him into an underfunded warehouse for children and let him rot while they drank vintage champagne on my dime. They had stolen his education. They had stolen his potential. They had looked at his bright future and coldly decided it was worth less than a few hands of blackjack. I felt a terrifying heat rising in my neck. It was not the cold, calculating anger I had felt toward Brandon's extravagant spending. This was different. This was primal. This was the fury of a patriarch who realizes the wolf is not at the door, but sleeping comfortably in the master bedroom. Griffin slid a second stack of papers across the desk. It gets worse, Edward. I didn't think it could get worse. I was wrong. These are background checks, Griffin said softly. These are the women Vanessa hired to watch the boy while she was at her wellness retreats. And Brandon was playing businessman. I looked at the photos, mugshots, 3 of them. They found them on cheap message boards, Griffin explained. Unlicensed, unvetted, the cheapest labor they could find. This one here, she has a DUI and a prior charge for child endangerment. She was watching Timmy for 3 months last year. This one was fired from a daycare facility for hitting a child. She was with him all summer. I looked at the faces of these dangerous strangers. These were the people who had been given access to my blood. Vanessa spent $2,000 a month on a personal trainer to stroke her ego and sleep with her in a hotel, but she wouldn't spend $20 an hour to ensure her own son was safe. She hired criminals because they were cheap. She hired them because she fundamentally did not care. I closed my eyes tightly. I imagined Timmy, 10 years old, sitting in that massive empty house with a stranger who smelled like stale alcohol, desperately waiting for parents who were too busy pretending to be rich to come home and tuck him in. Griffin pushed a small USB drive across the desk. I tracked down and interviewed the last nanny. She quit 2 weeks ago. She was the only decent one they ever hired. She quit because she couldn't take it anymore. She gave me this. It is footage from a hidden nanny cam she set up in the kitchen because she was worried about the boy's welfare. I plugged the drive into my computer with fingers. A video window popped up on the high-definition monitor. It was grainy footage of the massive kitchen at 42 Oak Lane. The kitchen I had paid for. The kitchen with the $50,000 Viking range and the Sub-Zero fridge. It was night. The timestamp clearly said 11:30 p.m. Timmy walked into the frame. He was wearing old pajamas that looked 2 sizes too small for him. He opened the stainless steel refrigerator. The blue light illuminated his face. He looked pale. He looked heartbreakingly small. The fridge was full, but not with food. It was stocked top to bottom with vodka. It was stocked with mixers. There were rows of imported water. There were trays of catering leftovers from some lavish party they had thrown. But there was no real food. There was no milk. There was no fresh fruit. There was nothing a child could eat. Timmy quietly moved a bottle of Grey Goose aside. He reached for a small container of yogurt, opened it, smelled it, and immediately put it back, his face scrunching in disgust. It was spoiled. He closed the fridge door. He sat down at the marble island, alone in the dark. And he ate the cereal dry, straight from the box, with his bare hands. I watched my only grandson eat dinner, like a scavenging, forgotten animal in a house worth $2 million. Then the audio kicked in. The front door slammed open, followed by loud, obnoxious laughter. Brandon and Vanessa stumbled into the frame, oblivious. They were loud. They were heavily intoxicated. Vanessa saw Timmy sitting there in the dark. She didn't rush over to hug him. She didn't ask him how his day was. She didn't ask him if he had eaten a proper meal. She sighed, a loud, exaggerated, dramatic sigh of annoyance. "Timmy, go to bed," she slurred, waving a dismissive hand. "You are messing up the kitchen. We have people coming over for drinks in 5 minutes." Timmy didn't say a single word. He didn't argue. He quietly closed the cereal box. He slid off the tall stool. He walked past his mother. She didn't even look at him. She was too busy checking her makeup in the reflection of the shiny oven door. Brandon was already at the counter, eagerly pouring more drinks, ignoring the boy's existence. I watched Timmy slowly walk up the grand staircase. His small shoulders were slumped. He looked like an exhausted old man, carrying the agonizing weight of the entire world. I slammed my hand down and paused the video. I could not watch anymore. The crystal glass of Macallan sat on my obsidian desk. I picked it up. My hand was shaking violently, not from fear but from a pure white-hot, uncontrollable rage that instantly burned away every other emotion I had ever felt in my entire life. I squeezed the glass. I squeezed it so hard I felt the thick crystal groan against my palm. And then I threw it. I hurled it at the wall with a violence that felt utterly necessary. It shattered into 1,000 glittering pieces. The ancient whiskey stained the silk wallpaper. I didn't care. I stood up. I walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the city, but I didn't see the sparkling lights. All I saw was Timmy eating dry cereal in the dark while his parents drank vodka. For 48 hours, I had been operating like a cold, calculated businessman. I had been cutting costs. I had been terminating contracts. I thought I was teaching a harsh lesson about financial responsibility to a spoiled brat. I was wrong. I was dealing with monsters. Brandon was not a bad son. He was a horrific, abusive father. He was a predator who preyed on his own innocent child to fund his disgusting lifestyle. He had gladly sacrificed Timmy's education, Timmy's safety, and Timmy's happiness on the altar of his own vanity. The money didn't matter anymore. The house didn't matter. The deep disrespect at the Christmas party didn't matter. Those were petty insults. This was war. I turned back to Griffin. The detective was watching me calmly. He didn't look surprised by my outburst. He looked exactly like a man who had been patiently waiting for me to catch up to reality. "You have more than enough for full custody," Griffin said quietly, breaking the silence. "The severe neglect, the financial fraud, the profoundly unsafe environment. If you file for emergency custody tomorrow, you will win without question." "Custody is not enough," I said. My voice sounded strange to my own ears. It was low, it was guttural. It sounded like a dangerous, animalistic growl. "I do not want the boy, Griffin. I want to utterly destroy them." I walked slowly back to the desk. I looked at the thick manila file. I looked at the mountain of lies. I want Brandon to feel exactly what Timmy felt. I want him to be freezing cold. I want him to be starving hungry. I want him to sit alone in the dark and wonder if anyone is ever coming to save him. I locked eyes with Griffin. "I want you to call the district attorney right now." Griffin raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise crossing his stoic face. "For the wire fraud, Edward? For the illegal gambling?" "No," I said, my voice hardening into steel. "For the child endangerment, for the misappropriation of a minor's trust fund, for the grand theft. I want full criminal charges pressed. I want him in steel handcuffs. I want him to rot in a miserable concrete cell, where the only thing he has to wear is an orange jumpsuit that doesn't fit, and the only thing he has to eat is whatever slop they slide under the metal door." I paused, my mind racing, calculating, plotting the perfect execution. "But before that," I continued, my eyes narrowing, "before the police take him away, I want him to lose everything in front of his peers. I want him to stand in the smoking rubble of his fake life, and know with certainty that I was the one who lit the fuse. I picked up the phone. I dialed Patterson again. Edward Patterson answered immediately, his tone sharp. "Change of plans, Arthur. The eviction notice. Is it fully prepared?" "It is sitting right here on my desk." "Good. But I need you to add something crucial. I need you to immediately prepare a petition for full emergency custody of Timothy Caldwell." There was a stunned silence on the line. Then Patterson spoke, his voice deadly serious. "Custody, Edward. That is indifferent beast. You need solid grounds. You need concrete proof of immediate physical harm." I looked at the chilling photo of the mugshot nanny. I looked at the falsified public school report card. I looked at the image of my grandson eating dry cereal in the dark. "I have proof, Arthur. I have proof that will make a family court judge sick to their stomach. Draft the damn papers, understood? And Patterson," I added, a smile finally touching my lips. "Yes, Edward? I want you to be at the house on New Year's Eve. I want the county sheriff there. I want Detective Griffin there. I am coming to their precious party. You are going to serve them both, right in front of everyone." "Yes, Edward," Patterson said, a hint of awe in his voice. "That will be quite a scene. It will be a massacre, I know," I said. I looked at the dark stain on the wall where the whiskey had hit. "Brandon likes lavish parties, Arthur. He desperately likes an audience. He loves to show off to the elite. So, I am going to give him the greatest show of a lifetime. I am going to show everyone in that room exactly what kind of man he truly is. And then, I am going to take my grandson, and I am going to metaphorically burn that $2 million house to the ground." I hung up the phone. I was slightly, but I was not weak. I was energized. I had a clear mission. I had a burning purpose. I was no longer a retired builder. I was a grandfather, and God help anyone who dared to stand between me and that boy. I looked at the thick folder one last time, then closed it firmly. The airtight evidence was sealed. The guilty verdict was in. The severe sentence would be carried out publicly on New Year's Eve, and it would be a total capital punishment. The crystal chandeliers at 42 Oak Lane were blazing with enough wattage to light up a commercial runway. From the snowy street, the magnificent house looked like a golden beacon of prosperity in the freezing Illinois night. Inside, the warm air smelled of lilies, high-end caterers, and impending disaster. It was New Year's Eve, the biggest, most important night of the year, and Brandon Caldwell was nervously sweating right through his second bespoke silk shirt of the evening. He stood near the extravagant ice sculpture, which was slowly dripping freezing water onto the pristine white tablecloth. He held a crystal flute of vintage champagne that he had paid for by pawning his 3 Rolexes an hour before the guests arrived. He nervously swirled the bubbling liquid and forced a charming smile that felt like it was stapled to his face. He was desperately cornering a man named Mr. Henderson, a retired orthodontist with far too much inherited money and not nearly enough common sense. "You have to understand, Gary," Brandon said smoothly, leaning in close to project false confidence. "The returns on the first round were astronomical. We are opening the Series B round tonight, but exclusively for close friends and family. The construction magnate, he is acting as the primary guarantor for this entire venture. He prefers to stay in the background these days. A silent partner. You know how the old-school billionaires are." Brandon took a quick sip of the wine. His hand trembled slightly. He hid it by casually adjusting his diamond cufflinks. He was lying. He was lying with every single breath he took. There was no Series B funding round. There was no guarantor. There was only a terrifying $50,000 debt to a bookie in Cicero, who had firmly promised to shatter his kneecaps if he did not pay in full by January 2nd. Henderson nodded slowly, looking deeply impressed by the name drop. "Your father built half the Chicago skyline, Brandon. If he is personally backing this, it must be rock solid." "What is the minimum buy-in?" $50,000, Brandon said far too quickly. He awkwardly cleared his throat. "Minimum unit is 50, but for tonight only, as a special favor. I can get you in for 40 if you can wire the funds before the ball drops at midnight. We desperately need to close the books for the tax year." Across the crowded, elegant room, Vanessa was performing her own desperate, high-wire act. She was wearing a stunning, backless red designer dress that she had bought worn, carefully planning to return it the next morning, with the tag still secretly tucked inside. She was laughing loudly at a terrible joke made by a woman whose husband owned a chain of car dealerships. The laugh was shrill, it was brittle. Vanessa's wide, panicked eyes darted around the room constantly. She wasn't looking at the guests. She was looking at the catering staff. She was utterly terrified that the angry catering manager would walk up and loudly demand the final payment she didn't have. She was terrified the power company would finally cut the lights. Every time a phone rang anywhere in the house, she visibly flinched. She caught Brandon's eye across the crowded ballroom. She raised her sculpted eyebrows in a silent, agonizingly question. "Did you get the money?" Brandon gave a microscopic, reassuring nod. He was close. Henderson was already reaching inside his tailored jacket for his checkbook. A frantic, never-ending hustle to cover yesterday's lies with today's fraud. They were stubbornly building a giant castle on quicksand, and the tide was coming in fast. They foolishly thought they could fix it. They thought if they got one more check, one more gullible investor, one more temporary lifeline, they could magically pay off the worst debts and restart the toxic cycle. They were pathetic addicts, addicted to an image they could no longer afford to maintain. "I will write it right now," Henderson said, pulling a gold pen from his pocket. "Who do I make it out to?" "Apex Ventures," Brandon said, his heart hammering against his ribs. Make it out to Apex. He watched the gold pen touch the paper. He felt a rush of adrenaline. He was going to make it. He would pay off the dangerous bookie. He would pay the mortgage arrears. He would figure out the rest of the disaster later. He needed to survive tonight. The room was loud. The live jazz band was enthusiastically playing a frenetic, upbeat version of Auld Lang Syne. Beautiful people were laughing, drinking heavily, and eating delicate canapés that cost $30 a bite. They had no idea they were standing in an active crime scene. They had no idea their charming host was a criminal. They saw the bespoke suit. They saw the magnificent house. They saw the winning smile. They failed to see the disgusting rot underneath. Brandon greedily took the check, his shaking fingers brushing against the crisp paper. It felt exactly like salvation. "Thank you, Gary," he said, his voice thick with overwhelming relief. "You won't regret this." He folded the check and slid it securely into his breast pocket, right next to his pounding heart. He took a deep, shaky breath. He had done it. He had pulled another miraculous rabbit out of the hat. Then the music stopped. It didn't slowly fade out. It stopped dead. The drummer awkwardly caught his stick midair. The saxophone player slowly lowered his shiny instrument. The loud laughter died instantly. Brandon frowned. "What is going on?" He muttered under his breath. "Who stopped the band?" He pushed his way through the confused crowd. Vanessa was already moving toward the oak doors, her face pale. Brandon stopped dead in his tracks. The crowd parted silently. Standing in the wide archway of the grand ballroom was not a late guest. It was not a disgruntled caterer. It was me. I stood there in a bespoke charcoal suit that cost more than Brandon's entire stolen wardrobe. I was not alone. On my right stood Arthur Patterson, clutching a thick, ominous leather binder. On my left stood the Cook County Sheriff, his silver badge gleaming brightly under the chandelier. And right behind me stood two large, uniformed police officers and Detective Griffin. I did not look like a tired mechanic tonight. I did not look like a confused, senile old man. I looked exactly like the powerful person who owned the damn building. Brandon's mouth fell open. He instinctively touched the thick check in his pocket, as if to desperately reassure himself it was real. "Dad," he squeaked, his voice breaking. I stepped fully into the brightly lit room. The sound of my Italian leather shoes on the imported marble floor was the only sound in the entire house. "Happy New Year, Brandon," I said, my voice effortlessly carrying to the back of the room without shouting. "I truly hope you enjoyed the party. Because it is over." I walked into the golden light of the grand ballroom. My Italian leather shoes clicked sharply against the marble floor, cutting through the total silence with authoritative weight. The elite crowd parted for me instinctively. They didn't move aside out of mere politeness. They moved because of an instinctual, raw recognition of power. I didn't look like the tired old man who had been coldly turned away from the doorstep in a blizzard. I stood tall. My spine was straight. The charcoal suit fit me like armor. Sheriff Miller stepped up beside me. He was a man, filling the space with the heavy presence of the law. He didn't smile. He stood with his hands resting casually on his thick belt near his silver badge. His presence turned this lavish party into a crime scene instantly. On my other side, Arthur Patterson aggressively opened his thick leather binder. The harsh snap of the metal rings echoed like a gunshot. He pulled out a stack of official documents, stamped heavily with the red seal of the Cook County Court. I saw the deep confusion ripple through the guests. These were people who exclusively judged value by appearance. They looked at my watch. It was a Patek Philippe. They looked at my handmade shoes. They looked from me to Brandon, quickly seeing the vast difference between a lion and a pathetic house cat. Brandon was frozen. The crystal glass of champagne in his hand was tilting dangerously. He looked at the sheriff. He looked at the lawyer. He looked at me. His brain was desperately trying to process the impossible. He was struggling to understand how his father, the lowly mechanic, had walked in with the county authorities and a bespoke suit worth more than his Range Rover. "Dad," Brandon stammered, his voice cracking like a terrified teenager. "What is this? Why is the sheriff here?" "You cannot barge in here. We are entertaining." I didn't answer him immediately. I let his pathetic question hang heavily in the air. I let him sweat. I looked around the room, making direct eye contact with Mr. Henderson, the targeted investor. I saw the immediate moment of recognition in his eyes. He knew my face. He had seen it in the high-profile business journals a decade ago. He looked down at the $40,000 check he had written. He looked back at Brandon, and then he slowly took a large step back, putting significant distance between himself and my son. He knew. I turned my gaze back to Brandon. I looked at him with the chilling detachment of a judge passing a final sentence. "I am not barging in, Brandon," I said, my voice calm and level. "I am simply entering my own property, and I brought some friends to help me quickly clean up the mess." Vanessa aggressively pushed her way through the crowd. Her face was a terrifying mask of fury and fear. She saw the sheriff and faltered for a fraction of a second, but her blinding arrogance pushed her forward. She failed to see the mortal danger. She only saw her party being ruined. She saw her precious social standing evaporating. "Get out," she shrieked, pointing a manicured finger right at my chest. "Get out of my house. You are drunk. You are senile. Someone call the police right now." Sheriff Miller stepped forward heavily. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "I am the police, ma'am," he said deeply, "and nobody is calling anyone. We are here to execute a court order." The room gasped, a collective intake of breath that instantly sucked all the oxygen out of the party. The guests began to shift nervously. They quickly set down their drinks. They eagerly looked for the exits. The grand illusion of the perfect couple was shattering in spectacular real time. I looked directly at Vanessa. I looked at the red dress she planned to return. I looked at the fear hiding behind her wide eyes. She knew, deep down, she finally knew that the free ride was over. "This is not your house, Vanessa," I said icily. "It never was. You were simply guests. You were tenants who paid exactly $1 a year. And you egregiously violated the lease." Patterson stepped forward and held up the thick documents. "This is a formal notice to quit," Patterson announced loudly to the entire room, effective immediately. "And this is a writ of possession, granted by the Emergency Family Court this afternoon. Mr. Edward Caldwell is the sole legal owner of this entire estate, and he is reclaiming it tonight." The silence that followed was absolute. Brandon dropped his crystal glass. It shattered on the floor, spraying champagne all over his shoes. He didn't even notice. I was the landlord, and rent was finally due. Vanessa lunged forward. Her face twisted into a demonic mask of pure fury that threatened to crack her makeup. "You have no right to be here," she screamed at the top of her lungs. "This is my home. My name is on the mailbox. You are trespassing, Edward. Officer, remove him. Remove him right now, or I will sue this entire county for harassment." She turned to the crowd, desperately seeking any allies. "Can you believe this?" she pleaded. "He is trying to ruin our reputation because he is lonely and sick. He needs a doctor, not a lawyer." The guests did not step forward to defend her. They stepped back. They watched with the morbid curiosity of people witnessing a public execution. "Tell her, Brandon," I said calmly. "Tell your wife who actually signed the checks for the down payment. Tell her whose name is on the title deed stored in the county records." Brandon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked exactly like a fish gasping on a dry dock. "Tell him, Brandon. Tell him to get out. Show him the papers. Show him we own this place." Brandon looked down at the wet floor. He couldn't meet her crazed eyes. He couldn't meet mine. "He cannot show you those papers, Vanessa," I said, stepping much closer, "because they simply do not exist." Arthur Patterson stepped into the center of the room. He cleared his throat dryly, commanding instant, total attention. "Ladies and gentlemen," Patterson began, his voice projecting flawlessly. "There seems to be a significant, unfortunate misunderstanding regarding the ownership of this estate. Let us clarify the public record." He held up a blue-back document. "This is the deed to the property located at 42 Oak Lane. And this is the operating agreement for that LLC. It lists the sole member and managing partner as Mr. Edward Caldwell." Vanessa laughed hysterically. "So what? That is a technicality for taxes. Brandon explained it to me. It belongs to us." Patterson shook his head slowly. He pulled a thinner document from the stack. "This is not a trust document," Patterson corrected her. "This is a residential lease agreement dated 5 years ago, signed by Brandon Caldwell as tenant and Edward Caldwell as landlord." Patterson pointed to a paragraph at the bottom. "The tenant agrees to pay a yearly rent of exactly $1. The tenant acknowledges he has 0 equity interest in the property. The lease is at will and may be terminated by the landlord immediately upon any breach of contract." $1, Vanessa whispered. The intense fight was draining out of her. She looked at Brandon with horror. "You pay $1. Dad set it up that way," Brandon mumbled weakly. "He said it was smart. It was smart for me," I interjected sharply. "It protected my asset from people exactly like you." Patterson flipped to the final page. "Clause 14, conduct detrimental to landlord. The landlord reserves the right to terminate this lease immediately if the tenant engages in conduct that threatens the safety or legal standing of the landlord." Patterson looked up, his eyes hard. 2 days ago, Mr. Brandon Caldwell left a horrific voicemail for his father, threatening to file a fraudulent petition for emergency guardianship based on false claims of dementia. The entire room gasped loudly. This was no longer a messy financial dispute. This was a betrayal of the highest order. "That constitutes severely detrimental conduct," Patterson stated, snapping the binder shut. "Therefore, the lease is terminated, effective immediately." Vanessa looked at the sheriff. "But you cannot kick us out. It is winter. We have rights. We have a child." Sheriff Miller stepped forward. "Actually, ma'am, you do not have any rights here anymore. You are now legally classified as squatters, and since Mr. Caldwell obtained an emergency writ of possession, you are criminally trespassing." He handed Brandon a folded paper. "This is the eviction order. It gives you exactly 1 hour to gather essential personal items. Medicine, basic clothing, toiletries, everything else stays. The furniture stays, the electronics stay. If you try to remove assets belonging to the landlord, you will be arrested for grand theft." 1 hour, Vanessa shrieked. "But my clothes! My jewelry! The jewelry you bought with my credit card?" I cut in sharply. "That is active criminal evidence, Vanessa. It stays. And there is one more thing," the sheriff added, turning his gaze directly to Mr. Henderson. "My office has received highly credible reports that this address has been actively used to conduct wire fraud and unlicensed gambling operations. We have hard evidence that funds solicited for fake business investments were directly diverted to offshore betting accounts." Henderson's face went gray. He quickly pulled the $40,000 check from his pocket. He stared at it as if it were highly radioactive. "Gambling," he whispered. "You told me it was a tech startup." "Brandon, I am the victim here, Mr. Henderson," I said. "My son has been aggressively stealing from me for 5 years. He has been stealing from his own child's education fund. If you give him that money, you are throwing it directly into a fire." Henderson furiously tore the check in half. The sound of the ripping paper was loud. He tore it again and again until it was worthless confetti, throwing the pieces directly at Brandon's feet. "You are a disgusting liar," Henderson said, his voice shaking with anger. The mass exodus began instantly. People grabbed their coats. They didn't say goodbye. They fled, desperately wanting to wash the terrible stink of failure off their clothes. Vanessa stood in the center of the emptying room. She hissed at me, "This is your fault. You humiliated us. I didn't plan your greed, Vanessa, I said. I didn't plan your adultery. I didn't plan your severe neglect of my grandson. I turned on the lights. You have 55 minutes left. I suggest you start packing. Vanessa looked at Brandon, waiting for him to fight. But Brandon was broken, staring blankly at the torn check on the floor. You are pathetic, she spat at her husband. She didn't say another word. Her hands were shaking as she clawed for her phone in her clutch. Her eyes were wild, focused on the glowing screen. She was desperately looking for her life raft. She was calling the 24-year-old model. Pick up, she hissed. Pick up, Julian. I stepped forward slightly. He is not going to answer, Vanessa, I said quietly. Shut up, old man. He loves me. He loved the Centurion card, Vanessa. I canceled it 3 hours ago. He realized the money was gone. People like him don't stick around when the check bounces. He blocked you. She stared at the phone. The truth sank in. She was not a pampered socialite. She was a broke, middle-aged woman with no husband, no money, and no lover. She let out a terrible sound that was half scream, half sob. She threw the phone, shattering it against a pillar. She looked at me, realizing she was utterly alone. She turned and ran. She ran for the door, her heels clacking unevenly. She didn't even grab a coat. She ran out into the freezing night in her red dress, desperately chasing a future that had already vanished. The oak door swung shut behind her. Brandon was still on his knees. The arrogance of the tech CEO was gone. All that was left was a 38-year-old man who had never learned how to tie his own shoes, because I had always bought him loafers. He crawled across the marble floor, pushing aside the spilled champagne until he reached my feet. He reached out with shaking hands and grabbed the fabric of my trousers. He buried his face against my leg and began to aggressively sob. Dad, please, his voice was muffled. You cannot let them take me. I am your flesh and blood. He looked up, his face a wet mess. It was her, Dad. It was all Vanessa. She made me do it. I wanted to make her happy. I didn't mean to hurt Timmy. He was begging for his life, but he was not begging for forgiveness. He was begging for a financial bailout. Think about Mom. He played his final, most painful card. Mom wouldn't want her baby boy in prison. She would want you to show mercy. Blood is thicker than water. He thought that shared blood was a suicide pact. I reached down and firmly peeled his sweaty fingers from my leg. The physical separation felt like cutting an umbilical cord that should have been severed decades ago. Get up, Brandon, I said, my voice cutting through his sobbing. He slowly got to his feet, swaying slightly. Dad, he whispered, a pathetic flicker of hope in his eyes. You'll help me, no, I said. The word hung in the air, and final, I am not going to help you. Brandon, every time I helped you, I was hurting you. I was teaching you that you could set fires, and someone else would always come with a bucket of water. You made these choices. You chose to steal. You chose to neglect your son, but I'm your son. He cried. Yes, I said. And that is exactly why I have to do this. A father who lets his son become a monster is not a father. He is an enabler. You need to hit rock bottom. You need to feel the concrete. You need to know what it feels like to have nothing but your own 2 hands to pull yourself up. But prison, he whimpered. Prison is a room, I said coldly. At least in this one, you won't be able to hurt my grandson anymore. I turned to Sheriff Miller and nodded once. Sheriff, please remove the trespasser. The handcuffs clicked. The sound was mechanical, cold, and necessary. Brandon didn't fight. He slumped, defeated. As they led him away out the front door, he looked back at me one last time. His eyes were empty. The arrogance was gone. The fake hope was gone. All that was left was terrifying fear. I stood alone in the silence of the empty $2 million house. It was finally over. The cancer was cut out. I turned and walked purposefully toward the library. My grandson was waiting, and for the first time in his life, he was going to be the priority. It didn't go to a developer. It went to a hard-working family who had saved for 10 years to put down a solid deposit. The millions I made from the sale didn't go back into my bank account. Every single cent went directly into the Catherine Caldwell Scholarship Fund. It fully pays for the tuition of 50 underprivileged children in Chicago. Children who have the hunger to learn that my son never had. It is exactly the legacy my wife would have wanted. As for Brandon, he is not in prison, not yet anyway. He took a plea deal. 5 years of strict probation and full financial restitution. He lives in a tiny, depressing studio apartment above a mechanic's garage in Cicero. I drove by his workplace yesterday. It is a greasy spoon diner on the rough edge of town. I watched safely from my car as he hauled bags of trash out to the dumpster. He was wearing a badly stained apron and cheap rubber boots. He looked much older. He looked exhausted. But for the first time, he looked real. He saw me watching him. He didn't wave. He didn't come over to beg for money. He nodded once, a sharp, painful acknowledgement of reality, and went back to scrubbing the thick grease off the pavement. It will take him the rest of his natural life to pay back what he stole. But for the first time in 38 years, he is finally earning his dignity one miserable hour at a time. The sun is setting beautifully over Lake Geneva, casting a long, golden reflection across the pristine water. The air is crisp and clean, smelling of pine needles and damp earth. I'm sitting comfortably on the end of the wooden dock in an old folding chair. Next to me sits Timmy. He looks different now. The dark hollows under his eyes are gone. He laughs loud, and often he is currently attending a prestigious private academy near my penthouse. And last week, he proudly brought home a science project with a gold star on it. I reach into my pocket and pull out the small object that started this entire journey, the antique pocket watch. I polish the brass until it shines like a mirror. Timmy, look here. I hand him the metal disc. He takes it carefully, treating it with a reverence his father never possessed. He gently pops the latch and watches the intricate gears spin with wide-eyed wonder. Is this the one from the story, Grandpa? The one that went to war? It is, I say, smiling warmly. And now it is yours. It reminds us that time is the most valuable thing we have. You cannot buy more of it, and you should never waste it on people who do not value you. He smiles at me. It is a genuine, bright smile that reaches his eyes. It is his grandmother's beautiful smile. I feel a large lump in my throat. I lost a son that freezing night in the snow. It is a deep scar that will secretly ache every single Christmas for the rest of my life. But as I watch my grandson cast his fishing line far out into the water strong, safe, and truly loved, I know without a doubt that I made the right trade. I had to radically prune the rot to save the roots. The Caldwell legacy is not the money, or the buildings, or the name on the trust fund. And this time, the foundation is solid rock. I learned the hard way that the most dangerous thing you can ever give a child is a life without consequences. For years, I foolishly thought my money was an impenetrable shield for my family. But in Brandon's hands, it became a deadly weapon that almost destroyed my grandson. True legacy isn't the numbers in a bank account. It's the core values you firmly instill in the next generation. Sometimes, you have to brutally let the people you love fall, so they can finally learn exactly how to stand up on their own 2 feet. It was the hardest thing I ever did, but saving Timmy was worth every single tear.